Very good afternoon, everyone. So, in yesterday's class, we have completed a discussion on the topic probity, and we come to the next part of our discussion. So, the next discussion, the next topic that is there is we are going to start with the topic civil service values and ethics in public administration. Civil service values and ethics in public administration. This is the topic that we are going to start today. And the very first subtopic within this is we are going to look at ethical dilemmas, ethical issues, and ethical dilemmas in public and private institutions. Ethical issues and ethical dilemmas in public and private institution. This is where we are going to begin our very discussion. So this is something that should be your subheading. Okay, this should be your subheading. Now here what we need to take into account is that we are going to discuss ethical issues and ethical dilemmas. But before we discuss ethical issues and ethical dilemmas, let's take up a comparison between public sector with that of private sector. So if you compare the two organizations, that is, if you compare public sector with that of private sector, do you see any differences? Yes, this is a question for you. It's a very simple comparison. I am asking you to compare public sector with that of private sector. So if you make this particular comparison, in that case, do you see any differences between the public sector with that of the private sector, or are they the same? Yes. Do you see any difference, or are these two organizations absolutely the same? Is there any difference? Is there any difference? A very good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome. We are now into our discussion of the next topic. The next topic is, as you have seen, for those who are late, we are talking about the topic civil service values and ethics in public administration. Okay, this is the topic. And in this topic, we have started with the very first subtopic, which is ethical issues and ethical dilemmas in public and private institution. And as a part of this particular discussion, we have started with a discussion in this comparison, public sector with that of private sector. And in that case, yes, most of you have mentioned that the objectives of these two organizations are different. Like, if we talk about the public sector organizations are more welfare oriented. They are more welfare oriented. And when we look at private sector organizations, private sector organizations are profit oriented. That means if you look at the goals that these two organizations have, one of the fundamental difference between these two organizations is related to the objectives or the goal that these organizations have, where you see the public sector to be more welfare oriented, the private sector is more profit oriented. Okay. Now that is one of the differences. That is one of the differences. But is that the only difference? And are there differences? No, are there some other differences which also completely transform the values that are important for public sector in comparison to the private sector? So you will find that public sector also, it's run by generally being financed through public finances, whereas private organizations that are there, they are generally privately financed. They are generally privately financed. And that means public sector organizations that are there, public sector organizations are using our money. They are using public money. And private sector organizations do not generally use public money. They are generally using private money. That is, they fund their own, they fund their own organization. Similarly, one of the key differences is with respect to externalities. With respect to externalities. Now, when I say externalities, what do I mean by that? By externalities, what I mean is that if you look at public sector organizations, public sector organization always scrutinize. They always scrutinize their decisions on the basis of they always scrutinize their decisions on the basis of their of its impact on the society, whereas the private sector is not very much concerned, as they are more profit oriented. So private sector decision making is more of profit centric. It is what? It is more of profit centric. That means the decisions that they take, those decisions are with an objective of trying to achieve more and more profit. But that is not the case when it comes to the public sector. That is not the case when it comes to public sector, because when it comes to public sector, they are very much concerned with the externalities. And what does that mean? What it means is that the scrutinize, the decisions which are being taken by them, they are open to scrutiny. The decisions that are taken by them, they are open to scrutiny. And those decisions are what? Those decisions are generally on the basis of, it's taken on the basis of evaluating what is the impact of those decisions. What is the impact of those decisions on the society? So when you are a civil servant and when you are taking a decision, when you are taking a decision, what happens as a result of it is that you always take those decisions which you know will not have any negative influence, or it will not have any negative impact. It will not have any negative influence. It will not have any negative impact. You know this. No, you know this. Clear? So there is a difference. What I want to say is that there is a difference between the public sector and in comparison to the private sector. Now, when we say that there is a difference between public sector and the private sector, when there is a difference between the two, the nature of organization, the goals are different, would the values be the same, or will there be any difference in the values of the public sector in comparison to the private sector? Will there be any difference? Will there be any difference? It is externalities. External, from the term external, externalities. Madhu says values would be different. What about others? What do you think? Would the values be the same, or would there be any difference in the values of the public sector in comparison to the private sector? Will there be any difference? Yes, public and government is the same. Will there be any difference? They would be different. There would be difference is what most of you are saying. There would be difference in terms of values. There is no doubt about it. Okay. Now, if I discuss the complexities, the complexities of the ethical issues faced, one thing that we have established now is that there is a difference between the values of the public sector with that of the private sector. One thing we have established in our discussion, one thing which now almost all of us agree upon, because all of you, none of you have mentioned that there is any similarity. None of you have said that there will be similarity, and all of us, including me, we have agreed. Now, we have agreed to this idea that there is a difference between public sector with that of the private sector, the values that would be there. Clear? So, if you look at complexity of ethical issues, what do you think? Would the ethical issues be which are being faced in public sector and the ethical issues which are being faced in the private sector, which of them are likely to be more complex? I'm not saying number of issues. I'm not saying number of ethical issues faced by public sector in comparison with the private sector. No, I am talking about the complexity of ethical issues. According to you, based on what you think, based on what our understanding has been, can you tell me where would the complexity lie? Would the ethical issues faced by the public sector, would that be more complex? Or would the ethical issues be faced by the private sector, which are being faced by the private sector, will that be more complex? Will that be more complex? Public sector. Why? So for those who are talking about the fact that public sector and the ethical issues of the public sector would be more complex, the next question that I would like to ask is why? Why do you think that the values of the public sector would be more complex in comparison to the values of the private sector? Why? Public sector issues obviously will be more complex. Public sector will be more complex. All of you have agreed to the fact that public sector values would be more complex. Fine. What I also want to know is that why would the public sector values be more complex, or public sector ethical issues will be more complex? Because of law and order. Because it works in public interest. As it is responsible for welfare. Rules and regulations, because it takes time, because it's welfare oriented. Due to political influence. Because public sector needs to take care of the diverse interest of the society. Okay. Okay. Almost all of you consider that the ethical issues faced in the public sector are more complex in comparison to the private sector. And almost all of you have mentioned that the reason for this is that when it comes to public sector is responsible for welfare of the people. It is responsible for the welfare of the people. And the private sector that is there, the private sector is not responsible for welfare. It's more profit oriented. So almost all of you have given this very reason. Let's try and take a different perspective to it. Let's take a different perspective to it. Let's compare the public versus the private sector. And let's try and understand the complexity here. Now, if you look at the public sector, see, every decision that is being taken in public sector primarily involves two important dimensions. What does it do? It involves two important dimensions. Think of yourself as a civil servant. Okay? Think of yourself as a civil servant, and accordingly you will understand this. Okay? Accordingly you will understand it. Think of yourself as a civil servant. When a civil servant is taking decision, so a civil servant will take decisions primarily with two important concerns. That means you will have to ensure that the decisions that you take are legal and they are also ethical. Obviously, can a civil servant take decisions and no, allow for implementation of decisions which are illegal? What do you think? When you become a civil servant, when you are you are suppose the superintendent of police of a district, or when you are the district collector, or for that matter, when you are in the position of, you are occupying the position of secretary to a particular minister, in such positions, can you take a decision or can you implement a decision which is illegal? And obviously, the answer to it is, like some of you have mentioned, you are correct, that answer to it is no. The answer to this is no. Similarly, if you are in such a position, can you take a decision which is unethical? Can you take a decision which is unethical? You cannot take a decision which is illegal. This is what you have said. Now, can you take a decision which is unethical? And the answer to that will also be no. The answer to that will also be no. That means, as a civil servant, these are the two most important variables. These are the two most important variables for all of you. For all of you. For everyone who is a decision maker, specifically when we talk about a public organization, bureaucracy, civil services, when you talk about such organizations, one thing that is absolutely clear to all of them is the fact that the decisions that they are taking, those decisions have to be ethical, and those decisions also have to be legal. It has to be ethical, it also has to be legal. Clear? Now, let's try and understand from the perspective of the private sector. Okay? Now, when we look at the private sector, what if an individual, suppose any of you we are talking about, suppose you get, interested in the private sector and you are holding an important office, but that office is it's a part of the private sector. Now, in that case, what would be the decisions that you make, and what will be the concerns that you have? So, in the case of private sector, you will find that the concerns are that yes, you have to be ethical, you also have to be legal, and there is one more very important concern which you will have, which would be that you have to, as an organization, also be profitable. As an organization, you also have to be profitable. So, as a private sector organization, the issues that concern a decision maker in the private sector is what? The issues that concern a decision maker in the private sector is that the decision maker has to be ethical. So, if the decision maker takes any decision which contradicts the ethical standards or the moral standards, if it is in contradiction to ethical and moral standards, then you will find that such decisions are being questioned. Such decisions are being questioned. Similarly, if there is a decision which is being taken and that decision somehow contradicts the legality, that means if the decision is somehow also not legal, so obviously he has to be accountable and he would be questioned for that. He will be what? He will be questioned for that as well. So, for the private sector decision maker, the importance of ethics and the importance of being legal is there. And along with that, one more variable which becomes very important for an individual who is a decision maker in the private organization, but not necessarily the fact that it is also important in the public sector. No, because as we have already seen that public sector organizations that are there, public sector organizations do not have profit motive. Public sector organizations that are there, they are for welfare. So public sector organizations are financed with public money. So the money that is basically used there is not the money that they have, the civil servants have, those people who are running that organization. That's not the case. Rather, it is about what? It is about the very it's about welfare, and it's public money which is being used. है ना? I will give you an example. Just approximately a year ago, there was a incident. Incident was related to I think it was Jodhpur, or it was it was a very important city in Rajasthan. Either it was Jodhpur or it was Jaipur. Okay, the district collector implemented a decision of vacating a public land. It was what? A public land was there, and in that very land, it was encroached upon. The land was encroached upon by few individuals, and they were they were very poor, so they were generally people who were homeless. They had encroached upon it. Now, this individual, the district collector, decided to implement a decision where the authorities were sent to that particular land, and they asked the people who were staying there, those who had come up with their temporary settlements there, and they were asked to vacate the land. Why? Because it was a public land, it was government's land. And when this happened, so the district collector was criticized. Why? It was criticized on the ground that they were poor people. They were poor people and they had nowhere to go. Because they had nowhere to go, so they had come up with those temporary settlements, and by vacating that very land, in a way, you are depriving them of their houses or their temporary residences. Now, if you look at this particular example, what do you see here? What you see here is that when it comes to the very individual, the individual was upholding what was legal. She was upholding what was legal. She was doing what was legally correct. But despite that, her decisions were criticized because it was something which does what? Which questions, which can be questioned on this very ground, that if they don't have any place to go and they are living in a particular piece of land which is not being used by the government, So until and unless it is not being used, why not just allow them to stay there? They were not encroaching upon the private property. So what was wrong? That means, as a civil servant, whenever you are in that very position, whenever you are there in that very position, what will you generally see? There would be two things that would be important for you. The first thing would be that your decisions should be in accordance to what the law dictates. Because if your decisions contradict what the law is, if your decision contradict what the law is, you will be held accountable. And similarly, what another important variable that is there is the variable of ethics. And you also have to ensure that the decisions that you are taking and the decisions that you are making, those decisions are what? Those decisions are in line with, ethics, because you can be questioned for that as well. Clear? Now, look at the private sector and try and just make this comparison. So, it is demanded of the private sector that they do what is legal. Obviously, they have to do what is legal. And it is also demanded that they do what is ethical. So, along with being legal and ethical, another important variable that becomes very important, in fact, it is something which is the most important variable for the private sector, and their existence is dependent upon it. Their existence is dependent upon it, because if they are not profitable, this would also mean that they are very likely not to remain in existence. Now, this profitability is not the core concern of the public sector. This profitability is not the core concern of the public sector, because public sector does not have this very idea or goal. They do not have this very objective. And that is where the problem lies. Now, if you look at these two, look at this diagram, and now tell me, when we talk about the complexity of ethical issues, whether it is the public sector, whether it is the private sector, according to you, which sector is likely to be facing more complexities of ethical issues? Would it still be, according to you, the public sector, or would it be the private sector? What do you think? Yes, would it still be the public sector, or now would you change your original idea, and would you consider it to be private? Some of you are now saying that it would be private sector, and some of you are still sticking to the idea that the public sector is likely to face more complex issues. So, if you think still that the public sector faces more complexity of ethical issues, I would like you to tell me why. Megha says still public. Okay, why? Why? Those who consider it to be public sector, tell me, why do you think that? Why do you think that? The public sector decisions affect the whole citizens. Private sector harsh because they have to choose common of the three factors. Public life is easier than private life is what Anuj says, because private sector has to be balanced in their value. Private sector has to be balanced in their value. Okay. Red tapeism, because of maximum responsibility and accountability. See, try and understand these two statements. I am concluding this particular topic with these two statements. What are those? Read the statement, write the statement. Read the two statements and also write them. Read the statement, write the statement. Done? Now, the complexity of issues is more in the private sector because they have to balance three variables: ethics, law, and profitability. But yes, the number of ethical issues and the number of, that means the instances of ethical issues, the number of ethical issues faced is less in the private sector, more in the public sector, number of. But when it comes to complexity, The complexity is more in the private sector. The reason being that there is a balance that they have to achieve between three variables and not just two variables. They do not have to achieve a balance between two variables. They have to achieve a balance between three variables. Clear? That is the very reason. That is the very reason. Now, have you written these 2 points? All of you. Have you written these 2 points? Have you written these 2 points? Anyone who has not yet written them? Okay. So you have written these points. Okay. Most of you have already written these points. The first point is that the number of ethical issues faced by the private sector is less, public sector is more. That means when you become a civil servant, when you are in that very position, when you are in that very position, when you are a civil servant, almost every day, you will face ethical issues. You will face ethical issues. Now, you are facing number of such issues. You will be facing number of such issues. There may be a possibility. There may be a possibility that on daily basis, there are some issues that have come up in front of you, and you have absolutely no answer for those issues, because you are unable to understand what would be the right course of action. This is very likely that you face on daily basis. But when it comes to the complexity of issues, because there is a balance that is required between these three, ethics, law and profitability, that is the reason why the complexity would be more in the private sector in comparison to the public sector. This is what I want to say. Okay. So Vivek, you have not written it. I will give you 1 more minute before I move on to the next aspect of our discussion. Okay. So 1 more minute. If you have not already written it, please write this down. That is what I'm saying. For government organizations, because their objective is different. Their objective is not about making profit. It's not about profit. It's not about, making profit. That is the reason why you will find that there is a difference between what the private organizations, the decisions that are being taken in private organizations and the decisions that are taken in the public organizations. Okay. Now, give the next heading, which is what? Now we come to ethical issues in public and private sector. Ethical issues in public and private sector. Ethical issues in public and private sector. So the first subheading here is ethical issues in public and the private sector. Okay, ethical issues in the public and the private sector. Shreya, at the end of the class, you ask me again, I will repeat the example for you. Okay. See, proper utilization of public money and profitability is two different things. Proper utilization of public money, Surajit, proper utilization of public money is that when you utilize money, public resources in the manner that you are supposed to. That means there are welfare policies. You use money to achieve the goals of those welfare policies. That is what it is. So the proper utilization of it is a different thing. It's a different thing. And profitability, that is generating money out of it, is a different thing altogether. Okay. So these two are separate ideas. These two are separate things. These two are separate ideas. Okay. Okay. Let's move on now. So we are now into our discussion of what ethical issues. So what is meant by ethical issues? Let's first try and understand what are ethical concerns, what are ethical issues. Okay. Now, in order to explain this to you, I would like to first explain, but let me just first dictate what is the meaning of ethical issues and concerns. So write down. Ethical concerns are defined as a situation. Ethical concerns are defined as a situation in which a moral conflict arises, in which a moral conflict arises in the workplace, full stop. These ethical issues tend to interfere with a society, with the society's principles, full stop. They are concerned with what is right and wrong, comma, good and bad, and how we use that information, to decide our actions, in the real world, full stop. Full stop. Now, before I explain what I have dictated, I would like all of you to read that once again. What have you mentioned? You have mentioned that ethical concerns or ethical issues that are there, they are situations where a moral conflict arises. Specifically because we are talking about public servants, so we are talking about at workplace. Now, when we say ethical issues that are there, ethical issues, they tend to interfere with society's principles. That means whatever we consider to be correct, that is basically challenged here. So that is the reason why you have written ethical issues tend to interfere with the society's principles. So whatever the society considers to be correct, ethical issues that are there, it will arise when whatever society is considering to be correct and what the situation has emerged, they are in contradiction. So what society considers it to be correct and what we see play out, that would be different. That is an ethical issue. That's an ethical issue. It's about judging right versus wrong, good versus bad. It is about seeing how information, how we use that information in real world, what we consider to be good, what we consider to be bad. And when the real world situation arises, we have the capability to apply that information, apply our understanding of good and bad, and if we apply that to the situation, if we apply that to this very situation, that is basically that's basically what it is. Clear? So what we are talking about is a situation where what we consider to be right and what we see, there is a conflict that we see there. Okay, so what we consider to be right and what we see happening, when they are in conflict, that means they are not correct or they are not aligned. That is when an ethical issue is said to have been emerged. Let's try and understand this through examples. If I believe, and according to me, the ethical concern is that as an individual, as a living organism, every living organism has the right to do what? They have the right to life. And no one has the right to deprive. No one has the right to deprive someone of their right. Of what? Of their right to life. If I believe this to be the ethical principle, and I see animal sacrifice going on in front of me, the society and the members of the society practicing animal sacrifice, this is in contradiction to my principles and what my belief of morality is. It's in contradiction to it. So in this very situation, what has come up for me is an ethical issue. It is an ethical issue. Tomorrow, when you become civil servants, so you are serving in different capacities. You are serving in different capacities. Some of you may be getting into all India services like IAS, IPS. Some of you may get into central services. And when you are serving in that very position, there are ethical issues that you may face. Like, suppose you are a civil servant and you are offered a bribe. You are offered a bribe. Now, what your belief is on what ethical and ethical or moral principle is that you are supposed to serve. You are supposed to serve the society. You are supposed to serve the society. You are supposed to ensure. You are supposed to ensure that there is steps taken for resolving social problems. There are steps being taken for development, but what you see happening is you are being offered a bribe. Now that is where that is the ethical issue, because what you see is an interference of what the societal principles are, because society believes that as an individual you should be honest. It is something which we believe in, which is what we normally believe in, that you should be honest. You should discharge your duties to the best of your capabilities. This is what we believe in, and what we see is in contradiction. So the principles that you believe as to be moral principles, ethical principles, what you see is a direct contradiction to those moral and ethical principles. It is a direct contradiction to those moral and ethical principles. Clear? That is basically what ethical issues are. है ना? So whatever you consider to be right, applying that knowledge in that very position. So when a civil, when you become a civil servant and you are offered a bribe, so what is the knowledge or information that you have about morality in this situation? In this situation, what is the information? What do you consider would be the moral action? Would it be accepting the bribe? Would it be rejecting the bribe? According to you, what do you think would be the right action? According to you, what do you think would be the right action? Would it be accepting it, or would it be rejecting it? Tell me. Would it be about accepting it or rejecting it? All of you are saying rejecting it. All of you are saying rejecting it. That means, how come you have arrived at this decision? How have you arrived at this decision? How have you arrived at this decision that rejecting would be the right thing to do? How have you arrived at this decision that rejecting the bribe would be the right decision to take? How have you arrived at this decision? How have you arrived at this decision? You have arrived at this decision because of the principles that you have, the information about what according to you is morality, what according to you is ethics. You have that information here. You have that information here. You have applied that information. What have you done? You have applied that information. You have applied that very information. That is what you have done. You have applied that very information. This is what I am trying to say. This is what an ethical issue is. Is it clear? Anyone having any doubts in understanding of what ethical issues are? Anyone having any doubts in understanding what ethical issues are? Yes. Anyone having any questions relating to the understanding of what ethical issues are? Ethics is universal and morality is personal. Yes, that is what we have discussed from the day one itself. No, ethical issues of the private sector are not the same as that of public sector. They are not the same. Okay. So now, because you have understood what ethical issues are, the last part of it is applying. Applying your knowledge. You know what is ethics and morality. And you see a situation, you apply your knowledge of ethics and morality. That is what, no, that's how ethical issues are. You know, the ethical issue that has emerged in front of you will always require that you use the information of ethics and morality that you have, and accordingly you use that information, you apply that very information in that very position. Clear? That is what it is. Okay. Okay. So now give a subheading and write ethical concerns in government institutions. First, let's discuss ethical concerns in government institutions. Ethical concerns, ethical concerns in government institutions. Ethical concerns in government institutions. This will be asked in exactly the same way. You may get a question where you are asked, highlight the important ethical concerns of public sector or of government institution. Same question you are likely to get. Okay. The way we are discussing it, you are likely to get this very question. Okay. Now, let's try and see what are the ethical issues or the ethical concerns of the government institution, and you will write this point wise. The first point is abuse of power. The first point is abuse of power. The first point is abuse of power. Abuse of power. Within this you can write exercising authority, exercising authority, exercising authority in an arbitrary, in an arbitrary or in an arbitrary or repressive manner, arbitrary or repressive manner, repressive manner, infringing upon, infringing, infringing, infringing on citizens' rights, infringing on citizens' rights, citizens' rights, and undermining democratic processes and undermining democratic processes, undermining democratic processes in such a manner, in such a manner that it damages the interest of the state, that it damages the interest of the state as well as citizens, as well as citizens, as well as citizens. Full stop. Now, what is this abuse of power? See, as a civil servant, we know based on our previous discussion, you have authority, you have power, and as a civil servant, you are supposed to do what? As a civil servant, you are supposed to, no, you are supposed to ensure, that the decisions that you take, the decisions that you make, they are always in the interest of the people. They are what? They are always in the interest of the people. They are not in contradiction to it. Rather, they are always in the interest of the people. Clear? That is what you are supposed to do. However, if you use your authority, or more appropriately, if you misuse your authority in such a manner that it encroaches upon the rights of the citizens, and it also undermines the democratic processes, it also damages the interest of the state and the citizens' interest. Now, that is what abuse of power is, and that is an ethical issue, because the authority that you have, the general understanding is that that authority will be used. It will not be misused. That authority will be used. The authority will be used. It will not be misused. That's what the general understanding is. That's what the general understanding is. Okay? Full stop. Am I audible? And is the video working properly? Are there any issues? Yes. Is the video fine? Please reply. It's fine. Okay. 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 So the very first, the first understanding, the first issue that is there, it is absolutely, it should be absolutely clear. Abuse of authority, abuse of power, that is the first issue. Coming to the second issue, what is the second point here? The second point is indifferent attitude of civil servants. Indifferent attitude of civil servants. The second point is indifferent attitude of civil servants. Indifferent attitude of civil servants. Now, can anyone explain this? What does that mean? Indifferent attitude. What does this mean? Indifferent attitude. Can anyone explain? No. Do you not generally see this when we talk about civil servants and how civil servants functions? Do you not generally see this? That the civil servants that are there, they are indifferent. Yes. What is your view? Biased attitude. Okay. Indifferent attitude, is it Bias attitudes? Is it about being biased? Mostly civil servants have the same attitude. My bap attitude is what Krish says. My bap attitude. Okay. See, indifferent attitude is about not being concerned. What is indifferent attitude? Indifferent attitude. Indifferent attitude is when civil servants are not concerned with what is it? When civil servants are not concerned with the problems being faced by citizens. When civil servants are not concerned, when civil servants are not concerned with the problems that are being faced, the problems that are being faced by the people, by the citizens, they are not concerned. They are not concerned. Apathetic. Yes, you are absolutely correct, Megha. The more correct word is the apathy that we have also talked about earlier. Apathy. So, civil servants have apathy towards whom? Civil servants have apathy towards the apathy towards the citizens and the problems that are being faced by the citizens. Now, if this is wrong, what is generally expected? That is, how should the civil servant behave? How should the civil servant behave? According to you, how should the civil servant behave? What is the problem with this attitude of a civil servant? How should the civil servant actually behave? How should the civil servant actually behave? Yes. Who will tell me? How should the civil servant actually behave? What should be the right value when it comes to the civil servants and the issues of the citizens? Yes, it is the value of empathy and compassion. Here, this is not what should be followed. Rather, the right, the moral, the moral behavior should be what? When civil servants have empathy and compassion. When civil servants have empathy and they also have what? They also have compassion. When they have when they have empathy, when they have compassion, that is how we expect them to behave. But what we find is that most of the times they are they have apathy towards others. They have apathy towards others. Clear? Third point. Corruption and bribery. Corruption and bribery. Next point. Corruption and bribery. Corruption and bribery. Within this, you will write, within this, you will write, corruption is dishonest behavior. Corruption is dishonest behavior, dishonest behavior by those, dishonest behavior by those in power. Dishonest behavior by those in power. By those in power. Full stop. Full stop. It ensures that a civil servant undermines fairness and integrity of undermines fairness and integrity of fairness and integrity of government processes. Fairness and integrity of government processes. Fairness and integrity of government processes. Full stop. Full stop. So again, corruption is a very important ethical issue. Corruption is a very important ethical issue because corruption is about undermining fairness. Corruption is about undermining integrity. And this should not be the case. Integrity and fairness are core to performance of public duties. They are core to performance of public duties. So if if these duties are not being performed, then there is a problem that is there. Okay. Next. Evasive attitude. Evasive attitude. Evasive attitude. What is it? Write down. It is the tendency to avoid. It is the tendency to avoid responsibility. Tendency to avoid responsibility and difficult decisions. And difficult decisions. And difficult decisions. Full stop. It can result into delayed decision making, delayed decision making, which is a compromise of public interest. Which is a compromise of public interest. Compromise of public interest. Full stop. Full stop. So another problem is what, or another ethical issue is what? It's the issue of it's the issue of evasive. That means civil servants do not want to take decisions. They do not want to take decisions which are difficult, and they do not want to take decisions which likely may be problematic. So they avoid, or they act evasively. They do what? They act evasively. That's the problem. That is the problem. Now, in order to ensure that this does not happen, no, this should not happen, because what will this result into? This is a compromise on public interest. What is it? It's a compromise on public interest. Clear? Next point. Next point. Mismanagement of public funds. Mismanagement of public funds. Mismanagement of public funds. Within this, you can write: civil servants fail to follow rules. Civil servants fail to follow rules or guidelines when they are handling public money. When they are handling public money. When they are handling public money. Public money. Full stop. Full stop. Now this is another problem. The problem of what? The problem of mismanagement of public money. So see, whenever it comes to, we have discussed this earlier also while we were talking about utilization of public funds, and we have specifically seen that when it comes to utilizing public money, there needs to be certain principles, there needs to be certain specific values and principles that need to be followed. And most important of all those principles was the principle of legality. That a civil servant, while he is handling public money, should always see what does the law prescribe, and should handle money they should always handle money with proper respect to what the law of the land dictates. But what we see is, most of the times there may be issues, there may be some ethical issues relating to handling of public funds, because there are so many cases that come up where there is corruption. There are so many cases where there is mishandling, misutilization of public funds. Now, if you take certain examples like, if we talk about, I use this example in RTI also, and I am talking about it here also. We talked about an example of how in Delhi, the chief minister's residence, which was being renovated. So the chief minister's residence which was being renovated, that used approximately 50 crores of public money. 50 crore rupees. That is a huge amount of money, because when it comes to public functionaries, specifically when it comes to public servants, whether it is politicians, whether it is civil servants, and specifically when they are using money which does not belong to them, it is money which belongs to the people. So if it belongs to the people, the responsibility to ensure that it is no, utilized effectively lies on public servants. But sometimes there is problems there as well. There are so many cases that we hear about misutilization of public funds, है ना? How many of you are here who are no who belong to the state of Bihar? Yes, I would like to know if you are from the state of Bihar. How many of you are from the state of Bihar here? How many of you are from the state of Bihar here? One, two. There are only two individuals. Three, four, five. Okay. So there are some of you who belong to the state of Bihar. Now, you must have heard about how in Bihar there have been number of instances. Okay, there are number of instances where there are very recently these things have come up because Bihar has number of rivers. Okay, so जितने भी उन रिवर्स पे पुल बनाए जाते हैं या तो वो गिर जाता है ना, या तो वो गिर जा रहा है, और सबसे ज्यादा एस्टॉनिशिंग ये बात है, मैंने नो व्हाई डिड आई स्पेसिफिकली आस्क हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू आर फ्रॉम द स्टेट ऑफ बिहार इज दैट a very astonishing no a very astonishing news that I heard about. I don't know whether no how true it was, but the fact that a pull no a specific bridge which was जो बनाया गया था वो ब्रिज चोरी हो गया था. That means there were specific materials which was taken away by the people there, है ना. मतलब just think of it. If you look at these two, no, I am obviously discussing, no, I'm discussing this in the lighter note. ठीक है, lighter note में बात हो रही है. But what has to be mostly, what has to be understood is that when you see such instances of funds, crores of rupees being used for construction of a particular bridge, and that bridge collapses within maybe a few days, a few weeks of it being inaugurated. What is this? What is this? This is basically a instance of misuse of public funds, because the authorities who have decided, because there are authorities who have decided to provide contracts to people. ठीक है, they have decided to provide contracts to people, and they are very unlikely to use whatever contracts they have to serve the people. What they do is they are looking for their own benefits. They are looking for their own benefits. So the individual who is responsible for using his authority to give those contracts, they are misusing their authority. They are doing what? They are misusing their authority. They know that this is going to be a problem. They know that. But what they do is they misuse their authority. They misuse their authority. This is what we are talking about, है ना? This is what we are talking about. And see, I'm not saying this is not the case only for one state, है ना? देखो ये चीज मैंने बिहार का एग्जाम्पल ये इस वजह से लिया क्योंकि बिहार में ये बहुत फ्रीक्वेंटली देखा गया है. नो the bridges collapsing, this is something that has been very frequent in Bihar for the last a year, 2 years, something like that. It was frequently seen, but that's not the only case with only one state. In India, when we talk about things, don't forget the example that we discussed, Satyendra Dubey, and how Satyendra Dubey, while he was employed in the National Highway Authority of India, how when he complained to his own authorities, related to this very problem, that there is roads being constructed and the material that is being used, the material is not qualitative. The contractors are overcharging. These things, when that happened, he was killed for that. He was murdered. He was shot because of that. So misuse of public funds. Okay, misuse of public funds. Yes, you are absolutely correct. There is monsoon seasons that are coming, and in this monsoon season you will hear number of such news, है ना? Not just one or two. You will hear number of such news where you will find that there are people, there are people who are suffering because somehow there is there is mismanagement of public funds. Clear? And the last point you can write here, the last point in in ethical issues of government institutions, the last you can write, misuse of power for post retirement benefits. Now, this is again an issue. Now, what happens is that in India, most of the civil servants, when they are serving in their career, what they do is they develop closeness, affinity with politicians and political parties. And the objective that they have is when that political party and when such politicians come to power, they are likely to favor them and accordingly appoint them to important positions, even if they are post retirement. So there are number of positions in India where you will find former civil servants are appointed to those positions, like being the governor of a state. So you will find that being governor of a state, if you look at all the governors that are there and see what career they have served in, you will find that most of the governors have been civil servants. They have what? They have been civil servants. So what happens is that they develop political affinity, that okay, if I'm close to this political party or if I'm close to this political personality, when this individual comes to power, he is going to ensure that I'm getting favors, and I'm getting favors. In fact, there has been one very recent instance. In fact, it's not actually it will not fit here, but when the recent chief election commissioner was about to retire, when the chief election commissioner was about to retire, there were a number of political personalities who were accusing him. He was being accused. He was being accused that uh, you this individual is taking such decisions only because he wants that after his retirement he gets some important positions. This is basically what was being accused of, what he was being accused of. Now this is what I'm talking about. This is what I am talking about. Okay, so see, Dr. S Jaishankar's example is not fit here, because anyone can become a minister. Anyone can become a minister. There is no prohibition on that. There is definitely a prohibition on civil servants. No, on civil servants, because it is being, no, it is it's most of the times considered that civil servants should have political neutrality. And when civil servants do not have political neutrality, we have discussed how neutrality is important. Now, how neutrality is important. In the case of S. Jaishankar, the example does not, it's not fit here, because S. Jaishankar was, no, has served in different governments. He was, after his retirement, he was offered the position of being the foreign minister, and by that time it was not like he was doing political favors. He had already retired, and no, he was not in a position to do political favors to no political parties. So his case was a bit different, because his case was about choosing on the basis of merit. No, it was choosing on the basis of merit. They do not have any good candidate for uh, no holding this very position, and they thought that S. Shankar, who has such kind of diplomatic, no, who has such kind of diplomatic experience, so that individual would be very fit in order to, no, discharge the duties of a foreign minister. That is a bit different. It's not about politicians or civil servants joining political parties. It is more about civil servants doing political favors. This is basically what happens. Okay, and during, they do those political favors during the service, so that once they retire, no, once they are no more in that service, so what happens is that then they could be in very important positions, which could allow them to, live a very comfortable life with a good salary and so on, and also enjoying power and privilege. So that is what it should not happen. This is very true for specifically civil servants who are in civilian duties. That means people who are part of police, people who are part of administrative services, for them this is mainly true. People who are part of foreign service, so they don't have any internal implications. They do not have power to influence internal administration. So that's a different thing altogether. Okay. Anyways, so this is some of the ethical issues related to government. Now, give a subheading and write ethical concerns in private institutions. Ethical concerns, ethical concerns in ethical concerns in private institutions. Ethical concerns in private institutions. ठीक है. Okay, let's move on. Ethical concerns in private institutions. First, unfair. First point, unfair employment practices. unfair employment practices. Unfair employment practices. Now, what is the meaning of unfair employment practices? See, in private sector, as we have previously seen, that private sector has what? Profit orientation. Private sector is what? Private sector has profit orientation. Private sector has profit orientation. Now, when we say private sector has profit orientation, now this is where the issue is, because what most of the times private corporates and other private institutions do is that they come up with those employment conditions where these conditions harm. These conditions do what? These conditions harm the individual who is employed by the company in order to ensure more profit for the organization that they are employed under. They are employed under. What am I trying to say? Dekho, there are a lot of times where some employment conditions that are there, they are unfair. And these employment conditions are in place with only and only one goal. What is that goal? The only goal that these employment conditions have, the only goal that these employment conditions have is the goal of ensuring that the members of the organization are exploited in order to achieve more profit for the organization that they are working for. And like, if you see, one of the problems with modern day organization is that modern day organizations, their requirements are such which does not allow what? It does not allow a work-life balance. It does not allow that. What do I mean? So if suppose see, an individual who is a part of a corporate house, he is expected that 24/7 he would be working for that very organization itself, and it is somehow assumed by the organization that because he is employed by them, so he has no life and there is no personal life that he has. He is supposed to 24/7 be present when the organization, when the company needs him. Now this does what? This is an unfair condition. This is what? This is an unfair condition, because this is likely to create, it's likely to create an employment condition where there may be issues related to what? Where there may issues related to work-life balance. And one of the examples of it is what was spoken by Narayan Murthy when he said that he wants to see the corporates and the people working there working for 70 hours a week. He called for a 70-hour week concept. Now this is completely unfair. What you are basically assuming is that 70 hours a week, which means if you leave suppose a Sunday, that is, suppose that's a holiday, so you have 6 days. So in 6 days you are working 70 hours. That is more than 10 hours a day. This was assumed by Narayan Murthy. He made that statement on Twitter that what needs to be done is that there is a need for the employees to work more. So if he's working for, specifically because these corporates are located in metros, metropolitan areas. So if you see the number of hours that they are talking about, and then you see the time that is taken to for an individual maybe to travel from his place to the to the organization that he works in. So if you look at the remaining time that he has absolutely no time for his personal life. He has absolutely no time for his personal life. And what this results into is that there are unfair conditions imposed, and these unfair conditions may also result into unfair termination, unfair suspension, etc., etc. So that becomes an ethical issue. Okay, please write this down. The employment practices, practices of the employer is to obtain high profit, is to obtain high profit, is to obtain high profit, and in order to do so, in order to do so, in order to do so, the organization may adopt service conditions which are unfair and even discriminatory, unfair and even discriminatory, unfair and even discriminatory, full stop. Now, before you write anything here, remember one more thing. When we say unfair employment practices, profit is not just the motive of the employer. There is also an issue related to employees here. And even employees tend to do what? Even employees tend to sometimes take up certain activities which can be considered as unfair. Which can be considered as unfair. Like, have you heard about this term? Moonlighting. Have you heard about this term? Moonlighting. Yes. Can anyone tell me what is the meaning of this moonlighting? Can anyone tell me what is the meaning of this term moonlighting? सुना है ये term? Okay, Siddhant, what does that mean? Moonlighting. What is the meaning of it? Okay, I will tell you what it means. See, yes, Tanmay, you are correct. Tanmay has mentioned it as having a second job. So this was something which was, this was something which was very prevalent during the COVID crisis. So what happened in COVID was that because of lockdowns that were imposed, employees were not supposed to go to the organization to work, and they were generally working from home. So because they were working from home, what they did was they were working for not just one organization, they were working for they also took up job in other organization because they know that they do not have to be physically present, and because they do not have to be physically present, so and they have to take up work from home, so they can easily do what? They can easily work, get two salaries rather than one, and distribute and manage their time accordingly, so that no, they can earn more. This is moonlighting. This is moonlighting, okay, where an employee takes up a second job and he earns money from that second job. It's not about earning money, it is about, no, the fact that most of the times this is conflict of interest. Because if you are working for an organization, if you are already working for an organization and you start also working for some other organization, there is a possibility that what you do for one organization, you also use that work for the other organization. That is conflict of interest. These two organizations are competitors, so that may become a problem as well. Okay, so what you have to also understand here is that there is a possibility of what? There is a possibility of employees indulging into unfair employment practices as well. Clear? So right here, right also here, employees also tend to employees also tend to take up deceitful practices. Employees also tend to take up deceitful practices, deceitful practices such as moonlighting, such as moonlighting. Full stop. Okay, so we will continue with this discussion tomorrow. We have Now, tomorrow we have to take up a discussion not just on ethical concerns in private institutions, but we will also be discussing a topic called as ethical dilemmas. And we'll try and understand what are the ethical dilemmas in public institutions, what are the ethical dilemmas in private institutions. Okay. So this is where we are going to end our discussion. If you have any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, this is where we end. Any questions? डिसीटफुल का मतलब होता है कुछ गलत करना, धोखा देना. That's what deceitful means. Okay, thank you. Thank you.